I've always been good at following instructions. It's how I survived childhood. It's also how I ended up with my father's name on 5 published research papers he couldn't begin to understand. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to have hobbies, unless they looked good on a resume. I wasn't allowed to waste time on video games, or music, or friends who didn't aspire to something serious. My father had one rule for me: excel or be erased. He immigrated here with nothing, built his company from the ground up, and made sure we never forgot it. That story, his rags to riches speech, was always on standby at dinners and fundraisers, like a personal myth he polished in the mirror. He turned it into a brand, and he turned me into a product. By the time I was 14, he'd already decided I'd be a mechanical engineer. Not just any, a PhD, Ivy League if possible, but a top 5 would do in a pinch. He started attending alumni events for schools I hadn't even applied to yet. He started donating. By the time I got into my current university, a well-respected engineering powerhouse, my father was already on their donor list. He attended board meetings, smiled for pictures in the lobby, dropped my name like it was a coupon for credibility. But the first time he insisted I list him as a co-author on my undergraduate research paper, I laughed. I thought it was a joke. He didn't laugh back. "I paid for the lab access," he said. "I gave you the problem to solve. And who do you think got you that mentor?" He meant Dr. Moretti, my undergrad advisor. And sure, Dad had met her at a networking dinner, but I'd earned her mentorship through my own work. Still, I froze. I was 21. I didn't know what saying no to him looked like. So I said fine, just to get it over with. And then I did it again the next year. And again. By the time I started my PhD, his name was already on 4 papers with mine: Dev Sharma and Raj Sharma. He loved how it sounded. He had the framed copies in his office. He showed them off like degrees. Once, at a holiday dinner, he passed one to my cousin and said, "This is the paper I wrote on turbine noise cancellation." He'd barely read the abstract. I should have stopped it earlier. But every time I thought about pulling back, I remembered the tuition, the connections, the unspoken threat of what he could take away. And he knew it. That was his real currency, not money, but power, influence, leverage. I swallowed it for years. But this time, this paper was different. We've been working on a high-level project around adaptive vibration dampening in aerospace components. I'd done the modeling myself. Weeks of late nights, code rewrites, simulations, and data validation. My advisor, Dr. Cito, said we had a shot at publishing in Nature Engineering. Not a minor conference. Not a student journal. Nature. This was the kind of paper that makes or breaks careers. And I couldn't stomach the idea of my father's name on it. So I made a decision. I didn't confront him. I didn't shout or accuse or beg. I wrote him an email. Calm. Simple. No drama. Subject: publication update. "Hi, Dad. Hope you're well. I wanted to give you a heads up that for the upcoming paper, I'll be submitting under just my name and Dr. Cito's. Given the specifics of the work, I think it's best we reserve authorship for direct contributors. I know you understand. Love, Dev." I read it 5 times before hitting send. It felt like slicing a tether that had always been around my neck. I went back to work. 5 hours later, I got the voicemail. Just 12 seconds. "Christmas is off. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And so will the university." That was it. No yelling. No guilt. Just a cold, precise threat, like a contract termination. He wanted me to panic. Instead, I exhaled. And then I started digging. I found the original emails, ones he probably forgot about, where he told me to just include my name to reflect support and not to overthink authorship stuff. I found screenshots of text threads with Dr. Moretti, where she explicitly wrote, "Your dad shouldn't be on this unless he's in the lab." I checked the metadata on every draft. Not one change tracked under his name. I printed everything. Then I made 2 copies. One I brought to Dr. Cito's office the next morning. She didn't blink when I told her. She just nodded and said, "I've seen this happen before." Her voice was tight. The second copy I gave to the Academic Integrity Office. Not as an accusation, but as a preemptive statement that if my father made legal noise or tried to damage my standing, I had evidence. Receipts. I half expected a storm of calls that night. But the only thing that arrived was a letter from my father's lawyer. It wasn't long. Just a 2-page PDF with some boilerplate language about intellectual contribution, implied partnership, and an ultimatum. If Mr. Raj Sharma's name is excluded, Our client will consider withdrawing financial support from the university, effective immediately. I stared at it for 10 minutes. Then I forwarded it, not to Dr. Cito, but directly to the university provost. Attached all the same documentation. And that was when things got quiet. Too quiet. For 2 days, no one responded. Then, on the third day, I got a call from a different number. The university was opening a formal review, not of me, but of him. His donations were being scrutinized. His position on the advisory board was being reevaluated. And unofficially, there was a whisper campaign now, quiet but growing, about legacy manipulation and academic fraud. I walked into the lab that afternoon and 3 postdocs stopped talking when I entered. Not out of hostility, out of curiosity. I wasn't ashamed. I felt lighter. I got back to work on my presentation for the winter symposium. Because for the first time in my life, it was my work. And no one else's name was going on it. The night before the symposium, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous about the talk. I'd rehearsed it enough times that I could have delivered it in my sleep. It was everything else. The silence. The waiting. The unspoken tension between me and my father, stretched thin like a wire ready to snap. He hadn't called. Not once. And that made it worse. When I was younger, his silence was never peace. It was a loaded gun he kept hidden until the right moment. And I knew how this game worked. Control wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Strategic. Waiting until you got too comfortable, and then yanking the rug out from under you. That's what I expected. But the rug didn't move. Not that week. Instead, I got an email from the Dean of Engineering, not a warning, not a threat, just a short, dry message. You have our full support to present your work independently. Academic merit is the university's guiding principle. I read it 3 times and still didn't believe it. But it was real. And just like that, I became the guy taking down a donor. Not publicly, not officially, but everyone knew. The rumors were everywhere now, students whispering in hallways, professors sharing sideways glances in the elevator. I was the kid who stood up to a power player and said, "No more." And suddenly people treated me like I was radioactive. Dr. Cito stayed supportive. She met with me twice that week just to make sure I wasn't spiraling. But you could tell even she was walking a tightrope. Because Dad didn't just donate money. He knew people. He went golfing with 2 of the trustees. His name was engraved in the materials lab wall, right above the entrance. He didn't build this place, but he made sure his fingerprints were everywhere. Until now. Because behind the scenes, I'd heard what was coming. His seat on the advisory board was being frozen. That was their word. Not revoked, frozen. No more meetings. No more votes. No more input. The donations? Under audit. They were looking into the timeline of his support for my work, matching it against publication dates, checking if other students had been influenced. I wasn't the only one, it turned out. Just the first to speak. The house of cards was swaying, and that terrified me more than I expected. Because here's the part one didn't anticipate. When you take away the lie, you don't just hurt the liar. You start losing the version of yourself that depended on it. I spent years telling myself I wasn't doing harm by letting him tag along on my work. That it was just a name, just a formality. That if it made life easier, it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It was fraud. And I'd let it happen over and over. The day of the symposium came fast. Snow had dusted the ground overnight. The kind that sparkles but doesn't stick. My walk to the engineering building was quiet, just the crunch of my boots and the low hum of nerves. The auditorium was packed. Not just students, professors, department heads, even some guests from out of town. I spotted the empty chair in the second row. His chair. Reserved. Untouched. I knew he wouldn't come. Not after the message he'd sent. But part of me still looked for him. Still scanned every middle-aged man with a phone in his lap and a frown on his face, wondering if I'd see him standing in the back, arms crossed, daring me to go through with it. He never showed. My name was called. I walked up, plugged in my slides, cleared my throat, and started. The project was about vibration reduction in unmanned aircraft, specifically, using AI-assisted feedback loops to adaptively dampen frequencies during flight. Technical, but elegant. I'd spent a year on it. I talked through the modeling, the problem set, the early failures, the testbed simulations, the late nights debugging in a half-lit lab. I was calm, focused, but I could feel the weight behind every sentence, the people watching not just the project, but the statement I was making. Slide after slide, no mention of my father. No Raj Sharma in the contributor credits. No, thanks to family support euphemism. Just me and Dr. Cito and the data. When I got to the final slide, I paused. Not long. Just enough. Then I clicked forward. The screen went white. Black letters appeared. True work doesn't need a borrowed name. Silence. Then, applause. Slow at first. Then louder. People stood. I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. But something cracked open in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. Pride. But also grief. Because in that moment, I realized he was never going to say he was proud of me for this. Afterward, a few professors came up to shake my hand. Dr. Cito gave me a nod that said everything words couldn't. I felt free until I checked my phone. One missed call. And a text. You ungrateful brat. You'll regret this. No signature. No pleasantries. Just that. I didn't respond. I didn't even save it under his name. I took a screenshot, dropped it in a folder on my desktop, labeled it Freedom, and then I turned off my phone, walked outside. Snow was still falling. Christmas was off. But so was the lie. And I never published under his name again. It was the first Christmas I'd ever spent alone. No family dinner. No polished shoes by the door. No awkward questions from relatives about my dissertation or when I was finally going to settle down. Just silence. And it was peaceful. But it also stung more than I expected. I didn't realize how much of my life was wrapped around him, not just the fear or the pressure, but the routine. The rhythm of performing for his approval. When that was gone, I felt the shape of it everywhere. Especially when I got the email. It was from the university's legal affairs office. Subject, inquiry concluded. Dear Mr. Sharma, the academic review concerning allegations of inappropriate authorship attribution has concluded. No misconduct was found on your part. However, we are referring the matter involving Mr. Raj Sharma to our external compliance team for further review, based on new concerns related to donor influence and undue academic pressure. You may be contacted as a witness in that process. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Best. Office of Legal Affairs. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat on the floor of my studio apartment, back against the cabinets, and laughed. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, but because I'd done the impossible. I'd kicked the hornet's nest, and somehow, I was still standing. But that wasn't the end. Because when a man like my father loses control, he doesn't disappear, he reloads. It started with little things. The stipend payment from the foundation he'd set up to support my research? Suddenly delayed. My old scholarship, the one he donated toward? Retroactively rescinded. Technically, those funds weren't in my name. They were in a restricted gift account. But once he pulled the plug, the fallout was immediate. My department scrambled to cover the difference. Dr. Cito even floated the idea of cutting her own project budget to keep me afloat. I told her no. I couldn't keep letting people carry my weight just because my father had made everything transactional. So I took on extra work. TA'd 2 classes. Picked up hours in the machine shop. Started tutoring first-year students on the side. I was tired all the time. But I was clean. That mattered more. Still, the damage spread. One afternoon, I walked into the lab and found 2 undergrads whispering. They stopped when I came in. One of them avoided eye contact. The other didn't. He just said, "Is it true your dad's suing the school?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know if he was wrong. I hadn't heard from Dad since the text. But I'd heard from his lawyer. Twice. First to cease and desist over the presentation slides. Then a second letter claiming I had misrepresented his involvement in past work and owed him corrective authorship recognition or financial compensation. It was a bluff. I knew it. But it still made my hands shake when I opened it. What kind of father does that? I asked myself that question a lot. It's easy to tell yourself a parent's cruelty is strategic, that it's about business, not personal, that it comes from some warped idea of love. But at some point, you have to accept the truth. Some people only know how to feel powerful when they're making someone else feel small. And my father? He was a master of it. I've been his project since I could walk. The son who would carry the legacy. Not with inheritance or memory, but with headlines. With awards. With lines in academic journals that read Raj Sharma, co-author. That's why this hurt him more than anything else I could have done. I'd taken away his reflected light. And in its place, I gave him silence. That's what really drove him mad. I didn't fight back. I didn't yell. I didn't post anything online. I just kept showing up to class, to the lab, to the shop, I kept submitting my work without his name. I let the story spread, not by my mouth, but by others. And it did. I could feel it. Other students started reaching out. Quietly, carefully. One PhD candidate from the physics department messaged me out of nowhere. Said he'd been forced to list his uncle, a major donor, on 3 papers he hadn't even reviewed. Another student, a woman in materials science, said she'd been strongly advised to include a faculty member on her thesis committee who never read her drafts but happened to be close with the dean. They weren't angry. Not yet. But they were watching. People were waking up. And my name, the real one, just mine, was becoming part of the conversation. They called it academic laundering, legacy fraud. Some even joked about forming a coalition. Not officially, not loudly, but enough to be heard in whispers. That winter, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. One morning, I found a sticky note on my locker. No name. Just, you spoke up. Thank you. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. Not moving. Not breathing. Because that tiny note meant more than any of the plaques my father had bought for me. And that night, I got a message from Dr. Cito. Provost wants to nominate you for the Student Integrity Award. No pressure. Just think about it. You've earned it. I stared at that line. You've earned it. No one had ever said that to me without a condition. Without a price. I didn't even know what to do with it. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the first chapter that I got to write without him. The invitation came in a plain white envelope. Inside was a single card. Ivory stock, heavy, expensive. The university crest embossed in gold. The office of the provost cordially invites Dev Sharma to receive the 2024 Student Integrity Award for exceptional contributions to ethical scholarship and academic leadership. Date, time, location, black tie optional. I read it 5 times. Then I set it down and laughed out loud. Not because I didn't want it, but because I could already hear his voice. An integrity award? For embarrassing your family. But this time, I didn't care. I didn't want his voice in my head anymore. I wanted mine. The ceremony was scheduled for the end of spring semester. It would be formal, public. There'd be press, donors, speeches. I'd be standing on a stage with a plaque in one hand and a mic in the other, and every word I said would be mine alone. So I started writing. But as the day got closer, I kept hesitating. I didn't want to sound like a victim. I didn't want to make it about revenge. I didn't want the focus to be him. I wanted it to be about the quiet moments. The choices. The parts no one applauds. Like the night I walked out of the lab shaking because I thought I'd just destroyed my career. Or the time I almost added his name again just to make things easier. Or how badly I still wanted him to be proud of me. That's the part no one tells you about cutting ties. It doesn't kill the craving. It just forces you to live without the fix. The week before the ceremony, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it. It wasn't him. It was his assistant. Soft voice. Polished. Nervous. Hi, Dev. Mr. Sharma asked me to inform you that he'll be attending the awards ceremony next Friday. He says he wants to show support. Just thought you should know. I stared at my phone. The words sank in like ink in water. He'll be attending. Support? No apology. No ownership. Just a performance. I paced my apartment for an hour trying to decide whether to tell the university. Whether to uninvite him. Whether I could handle seeing him in the crowd. But I didn't call. Because the truth was, I wanted him there. Not for validation. Not for reconciliation. But so he could see, with his own eyes, what I looked like without him holding the spotlight. The day of the event, I wore a suit I borrowed from a friend. Pressed shirt. No tie. I didn't need to look like him. The auditorium was packed. Students. Faculty. Reporters. Alumni. I stood backstage waiting for my name, heart pounding like I was walking into a fight. But when the moment came, I felt calm. They called me up. I walked out. Applause. Flashes. Whispers. I scanned the crowd and saw him. 5th row. Front and center. Arms crossed. Same expression he wore at every childhood recital. Like he was enduring something, not witnessing it. I turned away. The dean handed me the award. Shook my hand. Stepped aside. I stepped to the mic. And spoke. Not long. Just enough. I used to think silence kept the peace. That looking the other way was safer. Cleaner. That the cost of speaking up was too high, and the benefits too uncertain. But then I realized something. Silence doesn't protect the truth. It buries it. This award doesn't belong to a whistleblower or a rebel. It belongs to a student who got tired of lying and who finally learned that real work, the kind that matters, doesn't need a borrowed name. It just needs courage. Thank you. Applause erupted. I looked down. He didn't clap. He just stared, stone-faced. But I didn't feel small. I felt done. After the ceremony, I slipped out the side exit before the photos. I didn't want to play the game. I didn't want to shake hands with men who'd once defended him and now pretended not to know him. Outside, the sky was pink with the last light of day. I checked my phone. One message. From him. I was generous with you. This is how you repay me. I didn't respond. I didn't even save it. I deleted the thread. Went home. Opened my laptop. Pulled up the folder marked Freedom. Clicked New Document. And started writing my next paper. No co-author. No footnote. No family name. Just mine. Just me.